Hello, everybody. Paul Bussey here from the RIBA Expert Panel, talking about the construction industry and regulations pre and post Grenfell, but also, as reported to the government and the all-party parliamentary group, a complex creeping collective short-sightedness or myopia. Today, I'm going to try and explain. I've been working in this field of architecture for some 45 years, and the last 20 or so specializing in fire design and CDM. And I've been trying to make fire engineering solutions. And now I'm questioning that, to be frank. If I look at any tower block or any housing block, I'm now seeing disabled people. I'm seeing elderly. I'm seeing young. I'm seeing other vulnerable people. And actually, there's no such thing as general needs housing these days. Because of our social integration, we're all in the same buildings. So we must deal with the most vulnerable first. Now, if we look at our functional requirements in the regulations, 2010, there are 5 of them, and it's on page 29. And they are incredibly aspirational, but very vague, ambiguous, and non-prescriptive. So even though the Grenfell inquiry has suggested that we failed the external fire spread, B41, we also failed in all other respects, and I'll try and demonstrate that to you. So the approved documents, which everyone believe actually meet the building regulations, it's quite interesting to find that they're not mandatory. And even though it says, or it said in the time of Grenfell that this is pre-2017, that the fire safety requirements of the building regulations should be satisfied by following the relevant guidance in this approved document, it's very clear they don't. So there's all sorts of other regulations or guidance or legislation or quasi-legislation which seems to back this up. Now, this is an incredibly difficult situation as a designer, and if you have an approved document with all this criteria in it, B1 to B5, which are actually in a very non-intuitive design direction, if you like, 1 to 5, on the right-hand side, actually 5, 4, 1, 3, 2 makes a lot more sense. And there's also hundreds of individual requirements within that document. So is the ADB fit for purpose is my question. Now that photograph at bottom right shows all the different bits of legislation guidance that I have in my office here, that I have to plow through to design any building. And the green box top left is the means of warning and escape functional requirement, which is incredibly vague and aspirational. Now, in between that, we've got an approved document, which is not mandatory. How on earth can you work your way through all this conflicting and confusing, often conflicting, often confusing, arguably very clear to lawyers, but frankly, not to most of us? So when we look at Grenfell itself, we have a tower block in a green landscape, but actually fire brigade access was inadequate, albeit they were fighting the fire from a firefighting shaft, but fire tenders, and it proved aerial appliances still had to get near the building and couldn't because of landscaping, parked cars, and other features. So we failed part B5. So when we look at the building itself, we have originally on the right-hand side, there was a previous design proposal showing alternative means of escape from each flat. And the blue bottom on the left-hand drawing shows the sort of flat sizes, 4 of them originally, and you would escape from, on the right-hand side, 2 escape doors into exactly the same yellow lobby area. Now, actually, that's not an alternative means of escape in my mind, and certainly at the time, it seemed to be a way of achieving a waiver for one staircase. Get rid of that other staircase. We don't need it. It's got an alternative means of escape. Okay, so we now look at what was finally built. We actually have 6 flats per floor, all with 1 escape door, so that alternative means of escape was lost. On the left-hand side, we've got these 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom flats, just 1 door out, 1 staircase. 24 stories, is that an alternative means of escape? So the regulations were being relaxed at the time. Also, in this 1 staircase, we've got, going from top to bottom, we've got a lock gate at the roof, which prevented people getting out. Whether that would have helped them or not is another matter. But then there's gas pipes in that staircase, which apparently when they were turned off, the flames reduced. The old fire lift was not working on the day. There's no wet riser, which was required at 60 meters. There was obviously the 1 staircase waiver. There was no sprinklers at 30 meters, and above 100 foot that was required in the time that Grenfell was originally built. So these things were relaxed massively over the years. And then there's community use down at these lower levels, which would have required alternative means of escape. So historically, things have gone wrong. Looking at the external walls and this famous diagram, I'm not going to go into the detail, but the red box on the left-hand side shows an 18-meter high above 18-meter cladding issue, and it's very clearly stated Class O surface spread of flame was acceptable, but the building regs, according to Sir Martin Moore-Bick, supposedly failed, but the approved document said it was okay. So there's now, we think, even though the statistics vary, some 3,500 buildings with this Class O surface spread of flame cladding, and are all the designers and contractors guilty as a consequence? That's a question for everybody. So service penetration throughout the building, these all failed. So internal fire spread, compartmentation was completely ruined by these. We know the fire doors failed. We know the compartment walls might have been okay, but we're not totally sure because they had holes punctured through them for services, gas pipes particularly. And invariably, there's raised floors, there's other voids in the building, which cause all sorts of problems. So the actual building on site, it's necessary to have supervision from clerks of works. We know the stay put policy works 95 to 99% of the time, but actually Grenfell and Lacanel and various others have actually gone beyond that. So we know that we have to deal with unusual circumstances. Plan B, there needs to be an evacuation strategy, not just stay put. So we know that the fire brigade, when they get into the building, they have to fight the fire from bridgehead, 2 floors below the fire floor. They then have to bring equipment and kit up and hoses and attach to dry risers. And these hoses actually sit on the staircase. And thinking of people coming down the building whilst these guys are coming up, it suggests that single staircase buildings are not designed to facilitate simultaneous evacuation. So a drill I visited at a project in a fire brigade drill in Brighton showed firemen in a refuge area, albeit it was external on a balcony because the lobbies were too small. The hoses were rolled out on the staircase, and the hoses looked like that once they were charged up. Now, who can escape through that zone except for the very able and very ambulant? Not many other people, including myself. It was very difficult to work our way around those. So we go back to 1962, and we have fire legislation. The RIBA have gone back into history to see how did this work in the past, and we had a place of relative safety, which the building regulation or the approved documents certainly still encourage. Protected lobbies, not just a corridor. No flat doors in that corridor. And this protects the firefighters and vulnerable people. So moving on into 1974, about the time that Grenfell was actually originally built, there's actually a requirement for buildings over 100 foot to have sprinklers, plus also a fire stair, which is protected, is ventilated, has an external window, or at least ventilation at the top, and a firefighting lobby, which is also a vulnerable person's lobby, has a fire lift, it has a dry riser in the lobby, so the doors aren't propped open. These have all been relaxed in the Grenfell situation. So we come up to 2010, and we end up with these diagrams relating to small single stair buildings or buildings with a common staircase. Now, every flat should have access to an alternative escape route. Well, how did that work? It wasn't available. Single staircase buildings, the top floor of the building is no more than 11 meters above ground with a single stair. And that was current. That is still in the current approved document. Short dead end travel distances, 4.5 to 7.5 meters. 7.5 is smoke control. At Grenfell, we know is around about 9 to 10 meters. Not too far exceeding, but greater than the current regulations suggest. So we end up with a core like this at Grenfell, full of smoke because the doors are left open, no door closes, or people have left them open because they want to escape back if they can't get into a staircase. They need an option to turn back. And this actually shows it did not work. It was not a compliant scheme. So the RIBA, we've come up with trying to A, remediate Grenfell, or B, come up with a solution to deal with similar types of cores, with the green zone being this refuge area, firefighting lifts and disabled access lifts, a protected stair, and dry risers in the lobby, not in the staircase, propping doors open, affecting everybody else escaping. So we know our industry cannot deliver fully compliant buildings in terms of structure, in terms of fire protection, and the Edinburgh Schools demonstrates this. The diagram on the right shows how many defects are often found in major public buildings and other buildings under a design build contract. So these contracts are seen as a major part of the problem. So things failed on site with these. We need greater site supervision. We need better drawings that can actually help through the design stage to produce design information, which can then be passed on to the contractor and built, and then ultimately passed on to the client to actually manage and understand his building, and for future people to now take this on and realize how they can modify the building based on the existing fire strategy. We have we have specification information which we're now trying to tag with red flags, if you like. They're mandatory. We don't want these design value engineered out in the guise of fire engineering. Actually, it's cost cutting by another term. So at the RABA, we've put together some looking very complicated, but actually understanding this issue of the current regulatory situation. How do the current regulations apply to existing buildings, buildings currently under design, and buildings in the future? And putting together a set of prescriptive, but still reasonably flexible in certain areas, legislation or guidance, which can help everybody to come up with better solutions. We then start looking at how this relates to individual buildings, analysing it in relation to Lacanal and Grenfell, finding how it currently works and how we would rather it worked in the future. So we spent a lot of time historically researching the fire engineering, put it into modern day practice, and coming up with solutions for all types of buildings. So Grenfell failed for many reasons: fire engineering, design and construction complacency, incomprehensible legislation, and the framework of the regulations, and the deregulation over the years, inappropriate materials and value engineering, management shortcomings, contractual procurement misdirection. Is design build the best thing for producing a fire safe building? Possibly, but it needs considerable modification. Maintenance inadequacies. We know the building was not maintained well, it had been refurbished, and we know the smoke extraction system failed. The fire lift failed. Can we rely on mechanical means to increase travel distances or to allow higher buildings? Question mark. Firefighter training inadequacies for total evacuation. The firemen did a heroic job, but the firefighting training was inadequate to help the total evacuation. And then competence issues across the whole spectrum. How can you actually, as a designer, work and supposedly be competent when the regulations are so ambiguous, they are so flexible, and often, frankly, incomprehensible? So I would suggest that the whole industry, as Dame Judith Hackett suggested, are at fault. There's systemic failure here, and this is complex, creeping, and collective myopia from everybody. Thank you.